I stepped off the bus and looked around. There was nothing out here. I doubted it was even an official stop. But the directions said to get off at the first stop, past Greenville Road. And this was it. I checked my phone. It was 11:27 p.m. I had 3 minutes to spare. Leaves on the trees swayed in the breeze as the bus pulled away. I soon lost the vehicle from view as it rounded the bend up ahead. The nearest street light was 30 yards away, and I had to wait for my eyes to adjust to find the path through the woods the directions mentioned. Finally, I found it and followed it to a clearing. But as I approached, I saw that there were 3 other people already there. I hung back, wondering if these were other gamblers. That had to be what this was, some kind of underground gambling group. There was a dirt road that terminated in the clearing, and as I sat back in the bushes, I watched a van come down the road. The 3 people, 2 men and a woman, backed up so the van could turn around. Then it stopped, and 2 men wearing black masks, obscuring half their faces, got out. "Load up," one guy said, gesturing for the people to get inside as he opened the side door. When they were inside, the guy turned and looked directly at me through the trees. "You coming?" he asked. I wasn't sure how he'd seen me, but I took a deep breath and stepped out from the trail. "Yeah," I said. As I got into the van, I exchanged glances with the 3 gamblers. They looked like haggard, down on their luck types. The man sitting next to me reeked of sweat. The masked man in the front passenger seat turned around and handed us 2 small cans with clear plastic masks attached to them. They looked like medical equipment. I took one and the guy next to me took the other, only he didn't keep his. He turned and handed it back to the woman behind him, so I followed suit. Then the masked man handed another 2 back. These were for us. I heard the hiss of aerosol from the back. Looking over my shoulder, I saw that the 2 people in the back had placed the masks over their faces and depressed the small buttons on the cans. They inhaled the stuff that came out. After a moment, they both settled into the bench seat, eyes closed as they lost consciousness. The man next to me did the same thing, and I turned to watch as drug-induced sleep took him. I'd been worried about this very thing ever since I started down this path. I figured something like this might happen, something I wasn't prepared for. "What are you waiting for?" the man who handed the contraptions back asked. I looked up to see that the driver was staring at me in the rearview mirror. Then there was an unmistakable click in the silent confines of the van. I looked down to see that the other guy, who was still turned in his seat, now held a nasty-looking revolver. It was pointed at me, and it was ready to fire. There was no doubt about it. I was in over my head. I'd stumbled into something far more dangerous than I had anticipated. And as I lifted the mask to my face and depressed the button to release the drugs, I had a strong feeling that my friend Warren was dead. He was the only reason I was in the van at all. But if he'd gotten involved in something like this, I wasn't optimistic about his prospects. Then again, as the sweet-tasting drugs filled my lungs, I wasn't optimistic about mine either. If I wasn't careful, I could end up dead, too. Warren and I had lost touch over the years. We still lived in the same city, but our lives often got in the way. Immediately after college, we'd see each other every other weekend or so. But as the years passed, our meetings grew less frequent. I focused on my career almost to the exception of all else. And after a few years of grinding it out, I started to see dividends. Warren was busy with his own career, but he'd always been the kind of guy to find more meaning in play than work. And on those increasingly rare instances when we did get together, once or twice a year, usually, he would always tell me the same story. He'd say things were going well, that he was doing fine. But his behavior told a different story. He would insist on paying the dinner or drinks bill, no matter how much I fought him on it. But he couldn't hide the pained look that came over his face when he looked at the bill. He seemed to wear one of 2 suits every time we met. And while I wasn't one to go through clothes quickly, I couldn't help but notice that his were starting to fray and fade in spots. Then, the last time we met, it wasn't just his suit that looked worn and haggard. His face was drawn and sallow. His eyes seemed to have grown darker, as though they'd lost some of their spark. He got good and drunk during that last meeting, and he spilled his guts. Said he was a gambling addict and an alcoholic, and that he was in the hole for $100,000 to the kind of people you didn't want to owe even $50. While I didn't have anywhere close to $100,000 lying around, I told him I'd give him what I could, but he waved it off, laughing drunkenly. Nah, man, he said. I got a way to make the money. I got a way. Is it more gambling? I asked, not liking the tone of his voice. He shook his head, but then he stopped and nodded. Yeah, it is actually, he said, chuckling. It's the biggest gamble there is. I spent the rest of the evening trying to convince him to take the $30,000 I had in savings and my IRA, but he wouldn't hear it. He even threatened to beat me up if I kept talking about it. Not that he was in any state to beat anyone up, but I dropped it and just made sure he got home safe. The next day I called him, hoping to appeal to him when he was sober, but he didn't pick up. And I kept trying. When I didn't hear from him for several days, I went around to his place. When he didn't answer the door, I looked for a way to break in. Afraid I'd find him dead by suicide, I broke a lock on one of the windows and got inside. But the place was empty. On his desk, next to the battered laptop, I saw a note scribbled on a pad. 3rd Friday of the month, northbound Route 64. Get off one stop past Greenville. Path through the woods, 11:30. That was it. I figured it was some underground poker game for people who weren't allowed at any other gambling dens in the city. This was a week after the 3rd Friday in July. So I filed a missing person report and gave the police the note, but only after I took a picture of it. A couple of weeks passed, and Warren remained missing. The detective in charge of the case gave me empty platitudes whenever I called him. Said they were working on it. Said they were doing the best they could. It wasn't enough. So when the 3rd Friday in August came around, I boarded the northbound 64 just before 11 o'clock. I had no idea what I was getting myself into. You will choose one weapon from the wall behind me, and one weapon only, the man with the black mask said. I came to in a horse barn that didn't have any horses in the stalls. Groggily, I'd looked around to see that there were 7 other people in the barn with me. We were all in the middle aisle near one end, and we were all coming awake. It was clear that some of the men, a couple of the bigger guys, had been awake for slightly longer than the rest of us. The smaller members of the group, including 3 women, were slower to wake up from the fading effects of the drugs. Given that there were 8 of us, I had to assume there'd been another pickup spot somewhere else. We were all wearing dark blue coveralls. Our clothes and possessions had been taken. The shoes on my feet were still mine, and I assumed that was true for everyone else. When it was clear that we were all awake enough for his liking, the man with half his face covered started his spiel about choosing a weapon. Standing around us were several other men wearing similar get-ups. 2 of them I recognized as the guys from the van. At least, I thought it was them. It was hard to tell when you couldn't see their faces. You cannot change weapons once you choose one, so make up your mind first. And if any of you fight over the weapons in this barn, you will both be eliminated immediately. Of course, if you want to try and take one of the weapons from your fellow participants when out in the field, that is up to you. I was having trouble following what was happening. Why did we need weapons? What did eliminated mean? What were we participating in? The hunters will not be using firearms of any kind. They will be armed with weapons similar to the ones you see on the wall behind me. This is a fair contest. We do not tolerate cheating. You guys have guns! A skinny red-headed man sitting on the other side of the group said. It was true. All the masked men surrounding us had pistols on their hips. We are not participating in the hunt, the man said. Think of us as referees. He paused. Now, does everyone understand? There were a few nods from the group. Good. Now, when I say, I want you to stand up and choose a weapon in an orderly fashion. If someone takes the weapon you had your eye on, choose another one. The man sitting next to me shifted so he could get off the ground in a hurry. It still hadn't sunk in for me. My mind seemed to be stuck in the land of disbelief. "Go ahead," the referee said. The man next to me jumped up and speed walked over, grabbing a katana off the wall of weapons. Everyone else hustled up as well. I got to my feet and tottered forward, wide-eyed and unsure. By the time I got near the wall, there was only a spear, a compound bow with 6 arrows, and a scythe left. 2 men just ahead of me both went for the bow and arrows at the same time. "Back the fuck up, asshole," one of them said, his hands on the weapon. "I was here first," the other guy said in a whiny tone. "Get your hands off," the first guy said. "Now!" "This is bullshit," the whiny guy cried, pulling the bow off the wall and yanking it toward him. The main referee stepped in front of me and leveled his gun. Without a moment's hesitation, he shot the whiny guy in the head. The other guy dropped the bow and turned to run, but he didn't get very far. The ref shot him in the back of the head. Blood and brain matter dripped down the wooden walls as the guy holstered his weapon. He looked at me. "It's all yours if you want it," he said. I nodded blankly, reaching down to grab the bow and then snagging the quiver of arrows from its hook on the wall. The arrows rattled in the quiver as my hands shook. I made my way back over to the rest of the group, who stared at the 2 dead men with sickly faces. "Good," the ref said, clapping his hands together. "Now, let's get started." I huffed. My legs were pumping as I ran out into the forest on the vast property. Myself and the 5 other participants had been released only minutes before, and we spread out as we ran, each going our own way. It didn't take much imagination to see what was going on here. It was like the most dangerous game. There had been so many movies, books, and television shows that featured humans hunting other humans for sport. I'd never dreamed people did it in real life, least of all in America. Unable to run any longer, I came to a stop near a stream, hiding behind a moss-covered rock. Peering through the dark woods, I couldn't see any movement. The horse barn was too far back to see, and if there was a house on the property, I hadn't seen it. Once I was sure I was alone in this section of the woods, I looked at the compound bow I'd chosen. Why? I'd never fired a compound bow in my life. The shock of seeing those 2 men killed had frozen my thought processes, and when the ref had suggested I take the bow and quiver, I did so without much thought. Kneeling, I pulled an arrow out of the quiver and put it on the bow. Then I pulled it back like I'd seen people do on TV and in movies. It took some serious strength to get the string all the way back, but I did it. Taking aim at a tree some 10 yards away, I lined up the shot and let go of the bowstring. The arrow went wide and angled down quickly, bouncing off smaller rocks near the creek. I would never be able to hit someone with this thing if I couldn't even hit a tree 10 yards away. A twig broke nearby, and I knelt again, peering around. I set the bow down and slowly pulled another arrow out of the quiver. If nothing else, I could stab someone with a sharp arrow. Waiting and watching, I still saw nothing. It was dark among the trees, and I couldn't see very far. But I thought that some sort of animal had made the noise, so I decided to go retrieve the arrow I fired. I didn't want someone coming across it, seeing evidence that I'd been this way. Creeping along the creek bed, I moved toward the downed arrow, its brightly colored feathers allowing me to see it easily. That was something I'd have to keep in mind. Maybe I could rip the feathers off if I wasn't going to use the bow. That would keep them from being spotted from far off. My plan was to find a fence and escape, but I figured it wouldn't be so easy. Maybe the fence would be electrified. Maybe they would have guards posted. Still, I had to try. I wasn't going to try and kill anyone, that was for sure. As I came up to the arrow, I heard the unmistakable crunch of running footsteps. They were close. Spinning around, I saw the man who'd grabbed the katana jumping at me, sword held over his head in a 2-handed grip. Diving out of the way as the sword came down, I narrowly missed getting sliced open, but I landed on the rocky ground awkwardly, and my attacker kept his feet. He lunged for me as I rolled onto my back and lifted the arrow I still held, holding it up above me in both hands. The sword came down on the arrow shaft, cracking but not breaking the tough synthetic body. I kicked my right leg out and struck the man in his left knee. He shouted and stumbled back. As I scrambled up, I grabbed a rock the size of my fist and hurled it at his face. He turned his head at the last second, and the stone hit him in the cheek. He stumbled back again and fell down. Jumping forward, I slammed one foot down on his sword hand, preventing him from raising it. Then I dropped my other knee onto his stomach and put the tip of the sharp arrow to his neck. "Drop the sword," I said. The man released it, looking up at me with anger in his eyes. I reached out and moved the weapon out of his reach. "Why are you trying to kill me?" I asked. "Aren't you supposed to kill the hunters?" He narrowed his eyes before answering. "Man, how did you even get here? Did you not read the rules?" "What rules?" "Last man standing gets the fucking world on a platter. You win, you're set for life, no matter who you are. So why wouldn't I try to kill every motherfucker I see? Wouldn't you?" "What's the guarantee? How do you know that?" "Because I seen it, man. I know a guy who won this shit. He flies around in private jets now. He left all us other poor souls behind. He don't give a fuck about us no more." I shook my head. "Why take the risk? Look at me, man. I've been homeless for years. I'm an ex-con. Ain't nobody hiring me. Not unless I want to work for minimum wage. And guess what? I'd still be homeless if I was doing that shit. What's the point of working your ass off at a job if you can't even afford a place to live? Nah, fuck that noise, man. It's do or die time for me. Better than any other chance I had in my life." "This is insane," I said, bringing the arrow tip away from his throat. "I'm gonna let you up, but you better leave the sword and get away from me real fast. You understand me?" "Yes, sir. Yes, sir. You won't never see me again." "Damn right, because I'm getting the hell out of here." "Sure," the man said. "You do that." As I shifted my knee off his stomach and my left foot off his right wrist, I kept the arrow close to his neck, just in case. When it was clear he wasn't about to try anything, I backed off more. He sat up slowly. Then, pressing his hands to the ground, he moved to get to his feet. Suddenly, he grabbed a rock and lunged for me. As he swung the rock toward my head, I turned my head, lifted my shoulder, and thrusted the arrow blindly. A booming pain went up my shoulder as the stone hit me. I felt the arrow strike something, but before I could see just what happened, the man had dropped the stone and tackled me to the ground. As we landed, I looked up to see that I'd managed to stab him in the lower right side of his neck with the arrow. I pulled it out as his hands went to my throat. Then I jammed it back in under his jawline, where I thought an artery was. As I pulled the arrow out again, I was proven right. Blood came out in a torrent, quickly soaking into the fabric of my coveralls. He bled out quickly, his hands going limp. I shoved him off and got to my knees, breathing heavily and feeling sick. I still held the arrow in my hand. As I moved to stand up, I felt someone grab a handful of my hair just before a cold blade was pressed to my throat. "Most people don't even get one kill," a man said. He was standing behind me, leaning down to whisper in my ear. "You'll surely get through the gates of Valhalla, my friend. To die in battle is an honor." I realized with a sense of unreality that I recognized his voice. "Warren?" I said. The man behind me went stiff. Then he pulled my head back more so he could look down into my face. It was Warren. "Eli?" he said, eyes going wide as he withdrew the knife. "What the fuck are you doing out here?" "Looking for you," I said. "Oh no, man," he said, letting go of my hair and coming around to face me. No, you can't be here. Can't you show me out? Help me escape?" He shook his head. "There's no escape. It's not possible." "How do you know? What are you doing here anyway? Are you a participant?" He shook his head again, glancing around. "I'm a hunter, man. I won last month. I fucking won." "You won?" I said, not understanding. "I thought if you won, you were rich, and you could do anything you want." I was still on my knees, and as I moved to get up, Warren put a hand on my shoulder. "Stay down," he said. After glancing around again, he turned his eyes to me and spoke. "It's true. I have more money than I could ever spend in a lifetime. I can do whatever I want." "So what are you doing here?" I asked, already knowing the answer. Warren still had his left hand on my shoulder. He held the large hunting knife in his other hand. "I'm here because I love this, man. I'm good at this. I'm finally good at something. I'm finally alive. I haven't had a drink in a month. I haven't been to a casino either. I've stopped gambling." "You're good at this? You're good at killing people?" Warren looked into my eyes for a long moment. Then he shook his head. "I'm sorry, Eli. I didn't think you'd come after me. I didn't think anyone would miss me. I really didn't. He gripped my shoulder harder, and in my peripheral vision, I saw him tighten his grip on the knife. I wish I made the rules, but I don't. As he shot the knife forward in his right hand, I jerked up my left arm to block it. At the same time, I jerked my right hand up under his outstretched left arm and stabbed him in the armpit with the arrow. The knife sliced deep into my left arm. The pain took my breath away, but my right arm was already moving again, quickly pulling the arrow out and then plunging it back in before Warren stumbled back. I read somewhere or seen in some movie that the armpit contains a major artery, and judging by Warren's reaction, I was right. He dropped the knife, staring at me with an amazed expression. Then he turned around and wandered off into the woods, sticking his right hand into his left armpit to staunch the blood flow. I dropped the arrow to the ground and gripped my wound with my own right hand, and I watched as Warren moved off. There was a shout, and a woman with a scythe jumped out from behind a tree. She swung the tool at Warren, sinking the blade into his chest. Getting to my feet, I moved over and grabbed the katana. Then I ducked behind a tree and peered toward the woman. I didn't know if she'd see me, but I wasn't about to take any chances. If there was no escape, I knew there was only one way out. I would have to win. And as I moved swiftly toward the woman with the sword held ready, that was just what I planned to do. Thanks for listening. If you enjoy these stories, be sure to subscribe to the podcast and check out some more of my episodes here.